Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed with the final session for today. The speakers for this session are Mr. Hao Zhang, Deputy CEO, Industry, in the Institute of Technical Education, Singapore, Mr. Abhinav Madan, Managing Director, Tarang, India, and Dr. Hao Zhang, Assistant Professor, Department of Labour Relations, School of Labour and Human Resources, Renmin, University of China. The session will be chaired by Dr. Divya Nambiar, Senior Consultant, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, Government of India. I now hand over to Dr. Nambiar.
Very good afternoon to you all. So one of the key themes that sort of came up throughout the day was the idea of a number of different actors working together in the skill development space. And in today's session, we're really going to deep dive into that specific issue by looking at the Indian and the Singapore context. In this session, we have three key speakers. And apart from that, we also have one additional speaker, Mr. Mark Teo, who will also join us for about 8 minutes right at the end, just before the question and answer session. So, having set the context, let me begin by inviting Mr. Hao Zhang to speak on the ITI Industry Engagement Framework. Mr. Hao is Deputy Chief Executive Officer Industry of Institute of Technical Education, Singapore.
Very good afternoon. Thank you, ISIS, for inviting me. I'm from ITE, so just now you have heard a bit from Bruce, actually, mentioned the topic of transformation over the last 10 years. Now I'm going to move on to the micro level, right? Micro levels of engaging industry. Right? Very quickly, the topic of IT is showing more than the IT industry engagement framework. Now, IT, basically we cater full-time training for the youngsters at age 17. So today, I think close to about 96% of our budget are full-time trainers. Right? And then about 4%. So why is it so little? We have a new term that came in. He said, in 10 years time, I hope to have the CET, the continuous education part, playing a bigger role, maybe 30% of the overall budget. Right? Because today, the thinking is there's a lot of uploading up front, and then back, people are they coming back for retraining and so on. Okay? So today, the budget is not as high, but yet the number who comes to IT for nighttime training or part-time training is also quite big, right? And the budget is low because we tap on all the facilities that is available for the full-time. We won't come up with a course that is very different. It's basically whatever out there for the full-time was restructured for the full-time to continue to train, right? But today, what I'm going to talk about, I will focus more on our mission to talk about create opportunities for students and adult learners. So adult learners is very much one of our customers, right? So we are, so far a lot of focus, we talk about TVET and so on. Many talks about the full-time training, right? And my focus will be more on how we engage industry in training, not so much on the curriculum development and so on, which my academic division spend a lot of time engaging industry as well. Okay? So because of this mission, where the adult learners need to acquire skills, right? So besides our part-time training in the evening, on the weekend, we also do other things and create these opportunities for them to continue to acquire skills. Right. The IT industry engagement framework, basically the impetus, there are 4 elements there. Right? First one, manpower development, which is one of the most important ones. Then I will talk about the collaboration that we have, which Bruce also covered in the debate, sponsorship, and the engagement that we have in the industry. And the channels that we actually use, the schools and so on, where engage industry, we have a division called industry-based training division. Right? So they specialize in how to facilitate training in the industry. And Bruce was the CEO, he set up the Technology Development Center. Right? This is something that is slowly becoming more and more important as Singapore moves more into value creation. Right? And the outcome, you look at it, ultimately what do we want? We want skilled workforce out there. right? We want to help our teacher to stay up to date. I know that we recruit training lecturers with at least 3 years of working experience in the relevant trade, but all these teachings get outdated very fast, especially in technology. And we also hope that companies can themselves engage in training, right? Instead of always training is the business of the government, right? And if you look at the slide there, we work with companies and trade association. We don't work with private training school, right? That one, we have a private arm in ITE that will work with them. Right? We used to work with them, but since we formed the private company, we shift it out. So it's in a way, the mission for us is clearer because private education bring in another set of problems. Okay. Now, so I move on to the first blue box there. So the manpower development scheme, there are basically 4 types. And I'll go through each one of them. The first one is enhanced internship. Now, under the Skills Future framework, by the year 2020, all of our full-time students must go out on internship. Right? Before that, it was very informal. Some courses would go out, some don't go out. And this applies to both Polytechnic and ITE. I'm not so sure about the university. Right? So we have to go. So today, about 65% of our courses has got internship ranging between 3 to 6 months. And already we are involving about 1,800 companies out there. Right? So this is something quite different. So the curriculum, the 2-year course in ITE now will restructure such that 6 months or 3 months at the end of the second year, they have to go out. And so far, the experience has been really good. The students felt that they learned a lot of real things out there as well. And we've got small numbers who are sacked by the company and come back to us, And mainly, the main reason is because of attitude. Right? So we have to come back, counsel them, and then we send them out again. Okay? So our staff, what we call enhanced internship, because we do it in a way a little bit different from the Polytechnic. Right? We have structured learning outcome with task lists. The company that take on our interns need to be able to fulfill the task list. Right? And then if they could not fulfill up to a certain percentage, they can replace with certain task lists. So we make it a little bit easier for them. Right? And then we also make available so-called pedagogy training, coaching skills in particular, for companies who tell us that they don't know how to coach. And the assessment and so on is between the mentor in the company as well as their assessment carry about 60% of the weight. In 90 is about 40%. Right? So we are quite structured, we have student logbook and so on. And this thing would continue until 2020 where every single full-time student would go out for internship. Now next I'll talk about traineeship. Traineeship is actually apprenticeship. We rebranded traineeship because at one point it was like a taboo of apprenticeship. But today it's taking on a new turn. We're going to push for more of such courses out there. Okay? So today only about 5% of our intake every year are in apprenticeship. Right? For various reasons, there are students who come to us and say, I don't want to study full time anymore. I want to work. Right? So okay, if you work, can you try to find a company that we can work with to provide this apprenticeship training? So again, it's very structured and we model it after the German system. Okay, so basically, 5 days in the company, 1 day they come to us for what we call off-the-job training. Right, so the 4 days they are with the company, and it's very structured also, logbook. Company who takes our apprentice must also come to us for pedagogy training, how to coach, how to follow JD blueprint and so on, kind of basic German style kind of apprenticeship. And the student is now actually an employee of the company. Right? So they enjoy medical benefits, CPF and so on. The salary range between 1,000 to 1,500. So it's pretty good. Yes, over the years slowly moved up. We used to be 800 and so on. And I would say slowly our observation is company also getting more and more learned about situation in the economy. We used to be always just take foreign workers, but now they talk about I want to take in one and then I want to develop him. Hopefully after he go NS, he still comes back to me, I want to continue. So So we always tell them, I give you an apprentice, you take good care of them, then you develop them, and when he stands, it's good output, he may come back. Right? So for such training, we actually give a grant to the company for doing on-the-job training, as well for absentee payroll. And one day that they come to us is a loss of productivity to the company. Right? So there is a grant, roughly over 2 years, about $14,000 that we give it to them. Okay? So there are no shortage of places from the company. Right? It's just that the majority of our school leaver prefers to go full-time training. Okay? But this scheme is there and probably is going to expand because we're going to start a diploma which is based along this apprenticeship of work learn technical. Now next I'll talk about our other scheme called the Approved Training Center scheme. This is a scheme that we are quite proud of. That means we actually allow company to train their employee, leading to a full IT certification. Okay? So today we have 100 companies who train. They don't have to send their employees to IT, but they are only allowed to train their own employee. Right? So again, we help them to set up the whole infrastructure, and then all the pedagogy training and so on. But the technical training, their own staff will have the technical experience to train. So example would be like PSA. So they are doing our cert in NITEC in port equipment technology. Now this is something that IT can never train in, because we saw the train was so huge. So they train over there, and they are quite nationalistic in the sense that they don't mind training more, and they say other people always go from that. So again, and just now there was a question from Professor Zhang talking about how we keep up with our equipment in the full-time training. I mean, that is definitely a problem. Right? So one example would be printing. We used to train printing full-time. And I tell you can never keep up with the technology out there. So we have moved this sort of training up under this scheme. So we have a printing association who will now do this training for their members company. Right? So this scheme would enable us to train about another 4,000 Singaporeans or their own employee every year. Right, through certifications that either IT has it full time or we don't have it. Right, so other than port equipment, we have things like dental technology, dental assisting. All these are trained together with the Dental Association, the National Dental Center, aircraft maintenance. We train together with ST Aerospace. Right, so it's a scheme that we're quite happy with, and we can really scale it up. Okay. Right, then what about, the benefit of the company is, of course, is very flexible. They also enjoy some grants from us as well. Okay? They don't understand their employee to us. And I would say that the bigger company actually got very good training facilities. Right? And they are very good in training as well. Just one more they're in training, but this one will enable them to train towards national certification. Now, so the next thing that we have is that now the ATC scheme, for the SME they can't do it because you need to have the equipment, right? You set up certain space for practical training also. So we actually came up with a scheme called Certified On-the-Job Training Center scheme. Right? This is catering more to the SME, and we structure it after the Japanese, what we call the on-the-job training system. So basically we encourage SME to learn coaching, how to coach your staff, how to develop blueprint, and then train in-house using your own material, and that's how to structure it and then document it. So we give them this status with the IT logo, something like that. Right? And they can then embark on their own training. So we have about 320 companies, and every year they can train roughly about 30,000 workers out there as well. Right, so every time they change production process, they come up with structure, and they're quite systematic in their training. Right? Of course, we hope that we can expand this. That is it's quite challenging. You know, I mean, in Singapore, the company the training concept is not really there like the German. Because we study the German system, we thought there's a fantastic system. Because most of the companies are very involved in training. But here is different. So we have these 4 schemes that we have been using all the time to engage the industry. And also, we find that the apprenticeship scheme also is very handy in the sense that when sometimes a certain sector, like for example the chemical island, was there, it was built, investment was good, but suddenly it picked up very fast. And the question was always, how can we really provide skilled workers to the island? Then if the investor coming to us and they say, actually IT hasn't even started the chemical process course, and we haven't even thought about it. So we're going to quickly do something, and then we went to India, we went to China, and it was under this apprenticeship scheme that we quickly scale up and send it out to the industry. Same thing, we have industry like the process industry, supporting industry. They actually provide support to the refinery in the islands. So they do construction things like installation, joining, and so on. So again, a lot of workers there. So how to train? So we advise them work on a certified on-the-job training system. After they are trained, then we do the testing for them. So there's a lot of flexibility there in how to engage the industry, and then hopefully get them to continue to work and continue to train. Right. So next I move on to collaboration. Now Bruce talked a little bit about the memorandum of understanding. Right. I think today we have got about 120 MOUs before it. Right. And I think with our branding today to get partners to come to us, I think it's also difficult. Right. Most would like to come to partner us and then to offer us equipment or software so that our students can start using it and then we go to the workforce to use it. So this is not really a problem. Right. And the next aspect of it is what we call the industry project and applied research. So in IT, we also encourage the staff to do a lot of industry projects, right? Because the old mindset was always, IT catering more to the vocational level. So we thought that our staff did not really want to do all this kind of research kind of thing. But because applied research, which is meant more for the university. So I think when Singapore started the RIE 1995, now it's RIE 2020, research innovation. Actually IT was asked, are you in or out? So how can we say we don't want to be in, So we went in and then there was a grant of 5 million and so on. So during Bruce's time as CEO, he started the Technology Development Center. And from there, we slowly now, we get our staff through this center to work with the industry to try to help the SME. So if you read today's paper, I think yesterday we had some platform where there's this bee-hoon folding, and then the industry came to us for advice and we helped them to do this. So this is something that the Minister of Manpower, the Minister came and was quite happy that they are able to help. So our thinking is that by doing more of this, our staff can continue to engage the industry and so this is something also very important. Right? So our focus area also be aligned with the national area. All those titles out there, you see, they actually very broad. Right? So whoever can think of something, probably fit into one of these three technology focus areas. Right. So next, very quickly, I will just talk about sponsorship and engagement. Now, sponsorship. Just how Bruce showed the profile of our students. I think about 50% are with households of $3,500 and below. So our students have come to us, many needs financial assistance. So we also engage industry for sponsorship money, right, to put into what we call the ITE endowment fund. So there's a fund that was set up. So for every dollar that we raise, we put inside, the government match with $1.50. So there's a matching. Right, so today we have grown it to about $56 million. From this money, we actually do some investment, and the returns are about 1.8 to 2 billion every year. We give out as financial assistance to students who need it. So even then, we can help only about 10% of our students with this help. So the other 40, we will work with the CDC and so on to get some assistance for them. Right. So we thought this is also something very useful to us, and working on this years now. And also, we also do some fundraising for other things like those skills competition and so on. All this will also require some matching grant as well as what we call the donors get tax relief of about 250%. So everything. And yeah, this last one, the partnership forum, every year we'll do a big forum like this. Yesterday we just did one. Right? We bring in many industry people, close to 400 companies. There we share some of our innovation projects and how we can help them. Then we share on the latest in our industry schemes, what is available for them, what are the new fundings, what are the new schemes that they can embark on. Right? So normally at the end of it, there are a lot of questions because the culture here, the company is like to hear grants. Everything must say, what is needed for me if I do this, I do that. Right? So we will get together, agencies like Spring, E2I, who has got the money to give, right? And hear them out and try to match them. Okay. So yeah, that's it. My presentation is short. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ho. I think this presentation has highlighted from Singapore's perspective how industry collaborates through multiple means, apprenticeships, internships, but also the collaboration between industry and government has been highlighted, and the kind of symbiotic relationship between these two organizations also came out in the presentation. So moving from Singapore, we now move on to the case of India. I'd like to invite Mr. Abhinav Madan, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Tarang Employee Training Services, to speak on the convergence of industry, academia, government and social entrepreneurship in GTET.
Thank you, Dr. Divya. A very good afternoon to all of you. I'd like to begin by thanking Dr. Dipender and the entire ISAS team to have me over here, and also for the audience members who hung around to hear us at the fag end of the day. I will focus on very much the practitioner's perspective. So what I would like to give to you is the perspective of how skill development has, of course the Secretary laid it out very beautifully for us, how it's evolved and what are the challenges we face as a practitioner. I consider myself very much a blue-collar worker, I never mind the title, because we work in some of the most difficult geographies in Renewable, Odisha, Assam, Jharkhand, and that requires you to get your hands dirty and go down there in the field. So I'd like to give you a little bit of that perspective over the next 15-20 minutes. Shaping lives and empowering communities is our group's tagline, and that's something that we do very much so. I want to take you through a very short journey. This is the journey that I took. So this is South Odisha, bordering Andhra Pradesh. It's a tribal Naxal area, and I just wanted to give you the context of where we are working and where we actually live. And introduce you to one of our students, Anupriya, who is also from another tribal part of the state.
Oye, kakak boleh kita jawab yang sebelum kakak? Kalau kita ekor no? 7 ekor kakak boleh. Kam korang lagi? Oye, tak boleh dah धान कोटा कुछ तो सेटिल लगी.
So I think that little conversation sums it up very well, right? Anupriya was a school dropout. She didn't finish her high school. She was in her village when we met, and one of our mobilizers met her. When we tried to find out what were her economic opportunities or opportunities to have a livelihood, it's 60 rupees a day is what she'll get for unskilled labor, and that too only in the harvest season. The rest of the year it will be largely unemployment. So this is what we call seasonal employment. So when we went about, and in my previous job, I think I moved from the new economy to the old economy. I started my career as a business analyst, and I was working in Europe for a couple of years. Got disillusioned and chose to take this journey to rural Odisha and join a couple of my professors who actually started this work, this fantastic work. And I was pretty much convinced when I made my first visit to rural Odisha that this is exactly what I would like to do. I would like to figure out how we can create an ecosystem for youth like Bhubaneshwar to dream and aspire, to give them a chance to come back into the mainstream, give them a chance to become an active member of a family, earn a livelihood and maybe contribute economically to the family. And that's how we went about setting out the Tarang movement. So before I get into the model itself and how we've gone about building our various centers and how we do the skill development, I wanted to touch upon the challenges that we faced so far and the challenges across the 4 key stakeholders in the whole process. Right? One is the enabler from a government's perspective, 2 is the provider, that is us, the skill providers, 3 the receiver, that is the individual, and 4 the consumer, which is the industry. I'd like to start first with the receiver perspective. And I'm not going to go through this in great detail because the Secretary spoke very eloquently about it. There's a very high school dropout rate in India, 15 million is the population increase per year. Every stage, class 5, class 10, class 12, there's about a 50% failure rate. And if you sum all of that up, of the 15 million people that were born in a given year, only 14.2 will make it to, 14.2 will not make it to the organized sector. Right? They will be rejected by the system. And where will they go? They will end up either in the agriculture sector, or they will be self-employed, partially employed, seasonally employed. So we decided that we would like to focus on those who've been failed by the system and focus on what will be good. When we went out to the industry to seek what their requirements were, we found an ironical situation. A labor surplus country, when you talk to the key HR of the industry, the factories, they say they have a skilled labor shortage. So we thought, hey, this would be easy. You have all this unemployed youth, and on the other hand, you have all this requirement, and we just sit and match the supply and demand. But in reality, that didn't quite work that way. The manufacturing sector has its own challenges. The biggest challenge that we have in the manufacturing sector is the quality of the ITIs and polytechnics is poor. But at the same time, the labor law compliance is so huge that the industry does not have to hire on road. And that's a major challenge we have in our placements. On the services side, it's a very different environment. Attrition is high, jobs are entry-level jobs, such as those in retail or sales or marketing are tough, and the students leave after 6 months or 8 months, they get bored and leave. So we had these 2 challenges that we had to deal with. The quality of the workforce was a major issue, the attrition, like I talked about, and the regulatory framework. So these were the key challenges that were coming out in the industry, and when we were going about designing our solution, we really had to take all 4 of these into account before we built our model. But if you look at it, and Dr. Varaprasad spoke about it very well. I think he's the one person who talked about the career path. I think that's key for us because ultimately it's that individual learner, right, and how he or she will make his or her way up the career path. So I've taken a case study of a fitter, right, somebody who's in the mechanical workshop who learns basic fitting. As a school dropout, you can do a short course with us and learn to be a fitter. You can go on to do a 2-year ITI level course. This is our equivalent of probably ITE, which you have in Singapore. You spend another couple of years and you can get to a diploma. Another couple of years or 3 years and you can get a degree. And finally do a post-graduation and become an operations manager. So in theory, there is a career path for a blue-collar worker to go on to become a grey-collar and eventually a white-collar worker. So there is, in theory, some vertical mobility and career progression. However, in reality, what happens is that all these are the 3 buckets that work in silos. We have the school dropouts who will always remain at an unskilled level in the industry. We have the ITIs and the diplomas who will remain at a semi-skilled level. That's the definition of the government, unskilled, semi-skilled and skilled. And why they will remain at a semi-skilled level is because for them to pursue a diploma means giving up their own livelihood, right? And we're talking about the bulk of India which can't necessarily afford to spend 2 years in education. That's the big challenge we have. And similarly, you have the white collar which will remain the white collar. So there is essentially a great deal of rigidity in the system which limits the career progression. And that's the fundamental problem that we're facing. The student who takes up a short vocational course or even a longer course doesn't see a lifelong career in it, right? And that's exactly what we need to focus on and fix. From a governance perspective, I'm going to again skip through this slide very quickly. There's the Ministry of Human Resource Development, the Ministry of Skill Development, lots of government schemes and the industry who are doing skill development. And how are these funded? The self-funded courses are pretty much in the first 2 categories, which are the longer term courses, typically 1 year to even 4 years. The short-term government schemes tend to be 1 to 3 months. And finally, the industry, which does a small portion of training themselves, probably stick to short to medium term. So if we summarize the problems or the challenges that we've seen and we've faced, first and foremost, the entire skill development ecosystem, the way it's evolved, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, with the formation of the ministry and a number of schemes that are out there, it's a lot of short-term focus. And the short-term focus is shortchanging the aspiration of the youth. We can't teach someone how to be a machinist or an electrician in 2 months. It's not possible. To be an automotive electrician, you need to really know a lot more than what a short course will teach you. The second is the rigidity of the system in terms of entry and exits. We have failed to provide these multiple entries and multiple exits to the students. And third, the industry is marginal to the entire process. So this is exactly what the kind of research, and this is not an experience that we had or a study that we did. This is our lived experience over the last 9 years for me personally of practice, and that's how we've gone about constantly tweaking our model. So how we built our model in vocational education. We call it an institutional model. A lot of the schemes in the recent past in India are focused on the short term. They're focused on they encourage fly-by-night operators to set up a skill development center in a small rented out facility. As long as the government is subsidizing the course fee, they will have the center, and the moment the subsidy stops, the training center stops. Right? So we are very much against that. We believe in having an institutional model, and which is where the university comes in. So the university provides the backbone. The academia provides the technical expertise which we can leverage for developing new courses. The industry is very, very key to our model, and I'll go through that in the coming slides. And finally, there's an interesting angle that has come into it. Tarang is actually a for-profit company, and this company was created in 2009. We created this company when we partnered with NSDC, National Skill Development Corporation, because they were giving funds to organizations who had sustainable models, right? Because there's a lot of grants that are going out there, and grants for 500 million Indians who need to be trained are not sustainable. So the entire focus for NSDC was to support for-profit models which are sustainable. So we find a way to recover the training fee either from the market or from the industry, some way other than government grants. And that's where the whole entrepreneurship angle came in. And that's what also encouraged me and some of my other batchmates who were part of our team at Tarang to quit their jobs, quit much more lucrative careers, to take this up as a challenge and see how we could make it work. So essentially it's a public-private academia partnership. We have the Ministry of Skill Development, which has given us the seed funding, given us affiliations for ITIs, and also given us approvals to launch innovative programs. We have the university, which has its own qualification framework, which allows the career pathing, also the knowledge support, and in terms of the assessments and certifications, right? That's key. That's something which has been ignored largely across the skill system. And Tarang, which is the social entrepreneurship, is the implementing agency. Just to put some images into your heads, these are our university campuses and the central workshop area, which is very much the prefabricated, pre-engineered buildings that are an industry norm. So that's where most of our vocational centers are and where the training happens. The university campus in Palakamudi, South Odisha, is in a tribal Naxal area. It's an area where 10 years ago people would be afraid of even going. The collector, district collector, when he had to make a field visit, he would borrow our university's car because of the extremist violence there, the Naxal violence or the Maoist violence in those parts of the state. But in the last 10 years, we've trained about 40,000 youths from that area, and that has really helped take away the recruitment base of the Naxal cards. And that we believe is really the solution in the long term for helping us get rid of some of these social problems. This center here is in Ludhiana, and we realize that as we scale up, we can't afford, as a private organization which is funded through debt, we can't afford to just keep setting up buildings like these, right, and workshops like these. We need support, and that's where some of the state governments have come forward. So in Punjab, they have a project, they have a scheme called Multi-Skill Development Centers. They've built up this youth center. They've asked us to equip it, and we take a loan from NSDC, which is the funding agency, and put in the equipment and build up the centers. Similarly, even in the smallest, most tribal districts, for example, Kyonjar there, we've ensured that the center, the vocational center, is at least housed inside an educational institute. Because the environment that you provide to the student is absolutely key. There must be an environment of learning. Unless you provide that environment, he's not going to feel attached or feel like coming to the institute. And it builds a lot of trust with the parents as well and with the community. The last photograph is of our center in Guwahati, where we partner with Cafe Coffee Day, a leading coffee brand retail chain in India, for training. So these are the various industry partners that we lined up. We took a sectoral approach. We said that in the automotive sector, who are the key leading players in the country, we got them to invest in the workshops and the labs, right? And that took a lot of hard work. Our chairman, who couldn't be here today, he's put in a lot of effort and sweat and blood into convincing these industry partners to come. It's something that the Sector Skill Council ideally should have been doing, something that you spoke about, which they failed at miserably. It's actually been the biggest failing of, the reason why they were created was to provide the industry connect, and not one industry partner, these are all industry partners who actually invested in our centers, not one of them has come through a Sector Skill Council, it's come through our own efforts and hard work. The other aspect is the creating an entrepreneurial outreach. So we have a community outreach through various verticals. The vertical that I lead, which is the employability training vertical, is one. We also have other verticals, such as this one called Tarang Foods, which does spice oil extraction using a supercritical CO2 process. We have an inclusive development services arm which does banking correspondence work. And finally, we also have a not-for-profit company which works on creating nano-mini entrepreneurs amongst urban slums, urban poor. So there are these various social entrepreneurships or not-for-profits. These are our community outreach entities. And what they help us do is they help us build a larger engagement with the community. Because ultimately, the student, the learner who comes to your center, he or she must have, their parents must have a certain amount of trust before they send their work to you. Because mind you, the jobs are not in the areas where we train. We are training in East and Northeast, where the industry is almost absent. The jobs are all in Chennai, Bangalore, Pune. So a very important part of what we do, and I'll talk about that shortly, is the whole migration support. And in order to make the parents feel comfortable that their daughter is going to go hundreds of kilometers away to a place called Tirupur where the garment factories are, we need to build that trust. And that trust happens through our various community outreach activities. We've tried to build a sustainable model. While we still do a number of government schemes, it still accounts for 50%. Our internal target is it should not be more than 33% of our turnover. Unfortunately, the amount of money that is going in, fortunately or unfortunately, that's going into government schemes, we have no option but to implement them, because what's happened is that the industry has actually brought down its portion. So when we set out this model, we call it the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 model. And that was the model for which NSDC chose to fund us. We said 1/3 of our students should have come through a self-funded course, a third should be subsidized through government schemes, and the last third should be funded by the industry. But in reality, what's happened is the self-funded courses have progressed well. The industry has come down to under 10%. And one of the reasons is something that we spoke about earlier today, is that the industry is seeing a way of outsourcing its own internal recruitment and training costs to the government and benefiting from these government schemes. So they are shying away from investing in it. And that's an unfortunate situation for us in India. How do we go about the pedagogy? How do we focus on building hands-on skills? So we've broken up learning into 3 parts. Traditional learning happens in theory in the classroom, where we focus on the generic skills. The applied learning happens in labs, but we also included a component of what we call action learning, and I'll explain that to you through photographs. So the action learning happens through making real products, right? So we have our own fabrication powder coating unit which does furniture for our own internal consumption as well as outside. We have also an auto component manufacturing unit, and we supply to the aero engines for MiG and Sukhoi. So we are in panel with them and we do live production for them. We also have a garment production unit. And the garment production unit takes on orders like, for example, the uniform that you see that these girls are wearing, they're all made in-house, right? So what production does is, it also brings an element of the real world experience. Because earlier when we were training only sewing machine operators, the only thing they did was work on the sewing machines. But the moment we set up this garment production unit, we also had to take care of things like ironing, right? Like packaging, like the embroidery, doing the screen printing, right? There were other job roles within the factory which we didn't cater to, which we only discovered when we got into production ourselves. So the production part is a very important part of our model. And whichever course we're doing, we try to bring in an element on that. To summarize, what we see is, the Tarang edge. One is focus on confidence and communication, right? We're still very, very far away from being very successful in this. Because of course, the issue is the input, right? The input that you're getting is school dropout. Somebody who's been through a vernacular medium school who is not going to learn Hindi or English overnight or even in 3 months, right? So it's hard to turn that around. But we have got some support from the US consulate, and we have a program where we're focusing on English skills, especially for the sectors that need them, like hospitality. Production, on-the-job training, internships and apprenticeships. Right? We are following Mr. Manish Sabharwal's footsteps and Tim's footsteps and creating our own staffing vertical, because we realize that unless you actually provide that final linkage with the job or the apprenticeship, the internship and the employment. Without that, there's no outcome. And without an outcome, no student will come back to your center again. Forget about a student. If I mobilize a student from a remote rural village, right, it's on the basis of giving them some promise that they will have a job or some form of employment. If I don't fulfill that promise, I can forget about mobilizing from that community ever again, right? Because even if the job turns out to be not as good as we had promised, right? If the salary is slightly lower than what we had promised them, if the working conditions aren't great, right? If they have certain issues in the workplace, we are the ones who will cop the criticism. Because they will come back to the village and say, right, this institute doesn't give good jobs. So it's very, very important for us to manage the outcome. And for that, focusing on the apprenticeship part is very, very essential. Workplace interaction and life skills. That's another key, and we have a partnership with Gap, the retail brand, and they've helped us build the curriculum and the content for building life skills, which is a really interesting project called PACE, Personal Advancement and Career Enhancement. Pathways to higher education, that's where the university comes in. And again, that's absolutely key in giving the students the hope that they can have a career path, they can have a future, they can come back into the mainstream. And how we're doing it, I'll try to summarize that in a couple of slides. Migration support centers, again a very, very important part of our model. Having destination centers in Chennai, Bangalore, Tirupur, Pune, where we have our own staff, which helps these students find a place to stay. Unlike China, which has workman hostels in the industrial belts, India has failed miserably in that regard. Somehow it's fallen between all the cracks of the industries and education and HRD. When a student, and most of Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, whether it's the industrial parts of North India, they rely on migrant workers. So they rely on migrant workers in the factories, but there's no place for them to stay. The workers come from UP, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, Assam, West Bengal. So they will migrate, but they don't have a place to stay. And that becomes our job. So we actually help and handhold them. That's what the Migration Support Center does. And we also have a little bit of support from ILO, which is helping us to create this community amongst the migrant workers in Bangalore and Tirupur. The design of our programs, we ensure that it's inclusive in nature. So we have ranging from school dropouts to 10th and 12th pass to ITI graduates, and also for differently abled. We have a couple of courses for them which will ensure a job for them. I'm not going to go through too much in detail here. What we're envisioning, what we're seeing as a long-term plan, the way forward for us, is we're working our way towards becoming a skills university. We were recently awarded that status in Odisha. And what do we mean by a skills university? That it allows for students, no matter what your qualification and background is, it allows and gives you a course which will help you with the job, but also allow you to come back into education and continue to the next level of qualification. So a 10th pass can go up to a level 1, level 2, or level 3 course, which is a short course, which is invariably free of cost through a government scheme. The next level would be an ITI course, which would typically be paid. So you work for a couple of years, save some money, come back and do your ITI qualification with us. And the next level would be an apprentice or a diploma, followed by a degree, and finally a master's, ultimately resulting, let's say I've taken an example of automotive, a doctorate in automotive, or becoming an entrepreneur yourself. So that's how we really see the Skills University being inclusive and allowing people of various backgrounds and qualifications to come in and be part of our ecosystem. And just to again summarize with some photographs, the tool room that we have, which does training for machinists, CNC programmers, CNC operators. We have a partnership with Ashok Leyland, which does the heavy commercial vehicle technician training. We have a partnership with Yamaha for two-wheeler technician, Hyundai and Volvo Eicher again for automotive technician, forklift operators with one of the leading industries in India, Cafe Coffee Day for hospitality. We've trained about 1,500 students who are working in these cafes. Healthcare is a new sector for us. We've just entered into healthcare. We've built up all these lovely labs. We've just partnered with GE Healthcare and we've launched a program for OT technicians and also for X-ray technicians and working with differently abled. So we have a program where we train them to work with Cafe Coffee Day or in the government sector. To quickly, I think before I end, I'd like to show you a short video which talks about the way forward. So this is a student of ours called Reena. She got trained at a center in Bhubaneshwar. And she went on to work in Chennai, which is about 1,200 kilometers away from our home.
अच्छी है, आगे बढ़कर हम तो प्रमोशन और ट्रेनिंगशिप प्री मास्टर से ओटी से मैनेजर, तो मैं अभी प्री मास्टर हूँ, तो आगे बढ़ने के लिए मेरा इंटरेस्ट है.
So the key word for her, what she was saying in Hindi was that आगे बढ़ना, I want to grow further, and that's the aspiration. That's really the pulse of the youth of India. Right? Wherever you come from, whether you're from a remote village or you're from a city, you want to start somewhere and you want to keep going. And how we're able to meet that aspiration and how we're able to provide a youth like Reena a pathway will really determine how we grow going forward, right? And so going forward, how we've planned out, and just as Reena, there are other examples, whether it's in the technical engineering sector or it's in the hospitality sector. So we worked out a program called the Work Integrated Skill Training and Apprenticeship Program, where we take these youth and offer them pathways into higher education in a work integrated manner. Which is why what Mr. Bin just talked about in the whole OJT centers, I think that's very exciting for us. It's an area where I would love to collaborate, and we'll talk about that after later today, is how can we take the learning into the workplace, document the learning in the workplace and transfer credits, because it's all about breaking down the learning into credits, allow them to accumulate credits, whether it's through shorter modules, through on-the-job learning experience, and carrying them forward into higher qualifications. And that's essentially what we're trying to do with our work integrated program. So just to give you a sense, a 3-month course in a foundation program, another 2 years, but this can be done in a work integrated manner. So typically the dual mode that we're talking about, which takes you to an ITI level, another 2 years which takes you to a diploma, and then another 2 years to what UGC or the University Grants Commission in India is calling the BVOC program, Bachelor in Vocation. So it's allowing the vocational students to come back into the mainstream and get a degree. And with a degree, you are now eligible for, just as Reena, while she was working in a cafe, heading a cafe, if she comes back to Odisha and wants to join a hotel and wants a job, let's say in a big 5-star hotel, she will get the entry point of a 12th pass graduate. But she is now enrolled for a work integrated bachelor's program with us, right? And within a couple of years, in fact she has 1 more year to go for her course, she'll have a bachelor's degree while she's working, because we have a center in Bangalore where she comes in weekly once to do her studies, and with a degree she can now maybe aspire for jobs which are in a better hotel, better paying jobs in better restaurants. So that's essentially what we're trying to do with our work integrated program, whether it's a hospitality sector. In this case, it's a textile mill in Coimbatore, where we're doing exactly the same thing. This is the shop floor where our boys are working, but that's the training hall they've created for us in the factory itself. And one day of the week, exactly the model that IT is doing, one day of the week they're in class and they continue their ITI qualification. Similarly in Gujarat and similarly in different places. Our vision for 2025 is to reach a capacity of 100,000. So far, cumulatively, we've trained 100,000, but we want to reach an annual capacity of 100,000. We're currently at about 30,000, so we have a long way to go. I'd like to end again with a very, very short video, maybe just 30 seconds. So this talks about our engagement post-placement. You are at the destination.
Thank you so much, Mr. Madan. I think this is really useful in sort of bringing to life what we are facing in India. And I think you also brought out, besides industry and government, the crucial link and the perspective of academic institutions and their role, and also the trainee perspective. And I think that's a really important perspective that we also need to consider in the workshops. Thank you. So we now move on to the third presentation, and I'd like to invite Dr. Hao Zhang. he's going to speak on the varieties of school-firm collaboration in Chinese VET.
Hello everyone, it's me again.
Also to address the private public partnership.
Hello. But I think this is also can serve as a supplement to my talk in the morning. So in my talk in the morning, I concluded by suggesting that the absence of effective civil society governance in China will confound the skill upgrading agenda of the Chinese government and skill development practitioners. I didn't elaborate on this point clearly, and I forgot to answer your question actually. So I will talk a little bit about that now, because based on sort of this Western experience, if you look at sort of the German model or the British model, there is always the role of employer associations to either negotiate with labor unions or to coordinate among employers themselves on the training agenda at the industry level, to sort of have some industry level coordination and the skill development standards to guide the curricula and the training agendas at individual programs. In the case of Singapore, I understand is that you have a very strong interventionist state that can serve to coordinate different social partners and training institutes. But in the case of China, is that once we allow the state to use a centralized model to manage everything, then there is a problem, as I have suggested in the morning, right? Because that will become over-centralized because China is so big in terms of geographic scope. So the national system can never accommodate regional specificities and industry specificities. So it's always good. In the ideal case, it's good to have employer associations to serve as the coordinator at the industry level to establish some sort of industry level coordination to guide the skill development agendas of individual programs. However, as I have talked in the morning, that the dominant private-public partnership model nowadays in China is this individual school firm level cooperation, right? So these has a few weaknesses. So the first one is there is still this threat of labor poaching, right? So if one employer is investing in training, then his investment may become sunk cost, because then the other firms can just make use of their training and capitalize on those labor through poaching these workers to work in their own workplaces, right? And also there is this problem of over-focus on firm-specific skills, right? So if there's only one employer is collaborating with the training institute, then the entire curriculum is customized based only on whatever they need. And there's no economy of scale, right? So only big firms can afford this, that you can find a collaborator to train for themselves. But small, medium firms, they don't need that many apprentices every year, so they can't really engage in this kind of individual level model. So in light of all these problems, I will in this talk show some of the grassroots reform initiatives that local practitioners seek to somehow re-centralize the system, to re-centralize the model, bring it to the next level beyond individual school firm collaboration, to have some sort of coordination among employers at a wider scope. So I'm cautious about calling these models because these are just exceptional cases that I have identified in Guangdong province in China. I highly doubt the replicability of these cases in elsewhere China because of their unique circumstances for each case. But I think it's good to identify these cases to see some sort of future possibilities. So the first one is what I call grassroots employer association-led training programs. So first of all, we have to distinguish two types of employer associations. So I just argue that in China, the employer associations do not function in an effective way, do not function to coordinate the employers, right? Those are what I call official employer associations. So it's the general umbrella employer association attached to the Communist Party, which is part of the government administration, and they do not really function effectively in general in skill development. But there is also grassroots employer associations. Employers organize themselves from bottom. They have to also affiliate themselves to the umbrella association under the communist regime, but they do enjoy more autonomy in terms of governing their membership. These employer associations, grassroots employer associations in general, are also very weak. So they are not very proactive in training either in general, but we do see some of them can be proactive in certain circumstances. So there is this Internet of Things Association of Guangdong Province that did engage in this kind of collaborative training with vocational schools. Their motivation is that this association has a membership of over 600 small and medium-sized firms, and some of them are even startups. So all of these firms are not big firms, so they can't engage in that kind of collaborative training by themselves. So they have to rely on the association to achieve some sort of cost sharing and economy of scale through this platform. And also this is a relatively high-tech industry, so they do need high-skilled workers. And the cost sharing is that the training is really based on the association. The association provide all the training materials. They can allow them to use the training centers. They send technician teachers and transfer equipment and offer apprenticeship positions to these trainees. And the state also subsidizes the collaborative public school. That's how they bear some of the costs. And the trainees have to bear the cost by accepting lower wages during the internship period. So the outcomes for this particular program is that since 2011, they have enrolled over 30 students every year in this program, and these students focus on hardware in the IT industry, enrolled in 3-year programs. A biggest challenge is the weak governability over the membership of these employer associations, as I said. So even though they have 600 member firms, only a few of them actually are participating in this kind of training. So you may suspect this is still sort of a leading firm game, right? So only the leading firms are playing important roles in this kind of thing. So you can doubt if it's really employer associations functioning or just those a few leading firms are leading this. And this is a general problem faced with by a lot of the grassroots employer associations in China. So the second case is HR agency-led training programs. So there are all of these labor agencies used to be dispatching labor to different firms. And nowadays, when they try to seek industrial upgrading by themselves, they try to integrate the component of training into their own business structure. So they start to collaborate with vocational schools to train students, to train the workers that they're going to dispatch to other workplaces. And once they have, at the beginning they do this because they lack training capacity by themselves, so they have to collaborate with vocational schools. But nowadays, even if they have strengthened their own training capacity, they retain their collaborative relationship with vocational schools. because they can then market themselves as, some training institute that has some official background, right? So the cost sharing structure is very similar to the employer association model. So the agency bears all the training costs, and then the school will subsidize by paying for the tuition, and then the trainees just accept low wages. So the outcomes are also very similar. They have regular programs since 2014, and this particular case focuses on the automotive industry. A biggest challenge is lack of legitimacy. We talked a little bit about this in the morning, right? So these labor HR agencies are private institutions that are profit-driven, right? So it's suspicious if it's justified to use the state's money to train for them, right? The biggest, in terms of public-private partnership, there's always this issue about, who share what proportion, how much of the cost, right? So there's always state money there, and there's always private players. But the important thing is the state should, at the central level, define an institutional framework to justify this cost-sharing structure, right? But nowadays, because we don't have that central institutional framework in China, so this kind of thing have that problem of lack of legitimacy to some extent, A third model, in Shunde, is a district in Guangdong. The local state tried to establish some regional industry-level skill credentialing systems to coordinate the training agendas, to use those skill standards to guide the training programs within the local industry. As I said, the national vocational certificate system is not really recognized by employers. They do not really take those into account when they decide who to hire or how to train workers. So those standards are really shelved, although they are the only nationalized skill credentialing system. And then in some areas in Guangdong, then the local states start to have some alternative credentialing systems to sort of replace the national system and those systems are supposed to be more suitable for the local industrial development. So the motivation is to establish a localized skill credentialing system that is suitable for local industry needs and to guide the curricular development of the local VET programs. And the cost sharing structure is the local state provide financial support, and the schools and local employer associations also participate to provide the knowledge to really establish those standards, and the local employer associations also issue the certificate and are carrying out the qualification processes. The outcomes is so far they have established 12 industry-level skill standard systems since 2014, and 4 of them have already conducted certification and qualification processes. So biggest challenge is the lack of recognition at wider scope, right? So these are the Shunde system. So if workers owning these certificates want to go to work outside of Shunde, it's suspicious if they will be recognized by employers outside. And then there is this educational associations have emerged to serve as a coordination platform among vocational schools. So there's no coordination at the employer's side by and large, but then there's the schools association now that potentially can coordinate training processes across programs from the school side. There's this Guangdong Health Vocational Education Association. All these different program directors, they realize that, we are training students in the same beauty industry, but then our curricula are so inconsistent. And once they realize this problem because they once are organizing a skill competition, and they realize they cannot achieve a consensus regarding what to be tested and how to evaluate the students. So they engage in a big debate. I was in some of their meetings, and they couldn't even achieve a consensus regarding what are the basic massage techniques. They even debate on that very radically. So they suddenly realize, we don't have standards. That's the problem, because we are not training students in a very consistent way, because they base their curricula on their collaborative firms need, right? So now they want to increase consistency, so they establish this educational association to serve as some platform that they can coordinate on skill standards. So basically the schools just pay membership fee for the association, and the state can subsidize that projects. But the outcomes is not very significant, I would say, because this is only very loosely connected coordination network that doesn't have governability over the member schools. And also the schools still always have to follow whatever their collaborative firm asks them to teach in their curricula, so they can't easily change their curricula just because of other programs all teach these kind of things, or all do not teach these kind of things. So the big challenge is weak enforceability of all these standards, right? And then the last one is local state-led school-industry reintegration. This is also a very unique case in Dongguan city. Dongguan is a very industrialized city in Guangdong, and the industrial structure there is very unique. Dongguan has like over 10 different towns and the districts, and each town or district is clustered by a certain or two certain industries. So it's really by industrial clusters. And traditionally, many vocational schools emerged from these industrial clusters and served the local industry development. But later, all these schools become more marketized, so they start to teach the general topics, things like accounting. All these money-making programs are being established in these vocational schools. And the local government doesn't think this is a good thing, because we want our local schools to only teach whatever their industry cluster needs them to teach, to better integrate the market with the educators. So they restructured the local schools. They merged some of them. They renamed some of them. They got rid of a lot of the money-making programs. They reoriented some of the schools towards whatever the local industrial cluster that they are embedded in need. And the local state, in order to encourage the schools to restructure, they provide them a lot of financial support, and the schools also bear significant costs associated with the restructuring. So I can show you a table. This is before, this took place in 2012, and this is before versus after 2012. You can see that a lot of schools are renamed, and some of them are combined into one and serve local industrial clusters to make the local schools and local industrial clusters a better fit. The biggest challenge that this case is faced with is lack of replicability elsewhere in China. I would argue because this is a very unique industrial structure. Only Dongguan, this industrial cluster, is dominating the local industry, but probably not elsewhere in China. So just because this is a very preliminary study, so I do not make any sort of theoretical or strong argument, but just a little comparison. All these programs, nowadays, in the absence of proactive employer associations, all these practitioners from grassroots have started to realize the problems that they have with the individual level school-firm collaboration, and start to re-centralize and coordinate their training among multiple employers or at the industry level in order to achieve cost-sharing, economy of scale, and centralization. But they also faced a lot of challenges, including weak governability, lack of legitimacy, narrow scope of social recognition, weak enforceability, and weak replicability, all these kind of things. So conclusions. So basically, I already said the first argument, right? So the second one then is these experiments face great challenges. I said this again too. But these reform attempts serve to inform the policy making. I do think there is some positive aspect from these exceptional but quite successful, I would argue, grassroots reform initiatives, because they do serve to inform the policy making of the central government. This is, a lot of the successful economic reforms in China during the past 4 decades were originally based on all these grassroots experiments. once the state realize that these can be successful, they can promote these successful experiments in elsewhere China. So maybe this can show you some possibility in the future for the Chinese public-private partnership to be brought into the next level. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zhang. This is really helpful from the Chinese perspective, the localized grassroots level perspectives, and I think it really enriched the overall discussion because we've got industry, academia, government, grassroots level, innovative ideas, and of course the trainee perspective as well. I'd just like to invite Mr. Mark Teo to a little briefly, if you don't mind, because we'd like to have some time for questions, to just speak a little bit about your venture.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nambia. So I think first of all, really thanks to Dr. Radhava for accommodating us. I think I wrote to him last week saying that we heard about this event and we want to share some experiences because we've been through this experience with working with the Skills Council. We've recently done something here in this space. So I thought we'll try to take this opportunity to share our experience. So thanks very much, Dr. Radhava. I'll try to keep my comments pretty brief. So in the context, actually I need to give some context because we come from Infineon Technologies. It's a semiconductor company. So we're in the electronic space. The electronic space in India, the consumption has always been pretty high, but the manufacturing has been very low for many, many years, right? So therein lies that gap. And in the last, I remember a few years ago, about three years ago, I was sitting with Fabian in the audience over there, Boon Tiong in the ITES group. We were talking a little bit about electronics skill development in India, and we came to the conclusion that the demand is not there. The demand pool is just not there in order to pull the needs for skill development to actually run a lot of programs. Right? Fast forward to 1 year ago, 1 year ago, now the government has put into place many new policies. Right? There's been the modified special incentive scheme. There's about $2 billion of incentives being put into this sector, and on the back of that, about $25 billion of investment have gone in now to electronics plants. And there's also been the phased manufacturing program, the changes in the taxation for mobile manufacturing, which has led to about 100 new plants, mobile plants, opening up. Of course, and of course, there's also the double ESL, Energy Efficiency Services Limited, driving the demand in lighting, in street lighting, fans, energy efficient fans. And they just announced the electric vehicle tender. 10,000 electric vehicles now are going to be made in India over the next 9 months. Right? That's something that you don't even see anywhere else in the world. So this demand push has really now happened, which then translates into a need for skills, right? Obviously, where more local manufacturing at the board level, not just the assembly, not just the final assembly of these devices, but actually at the board level, buying local components, fitting them into PCBs happening in the country, right? So this then leads to the requirements in skill. Yeah. So this pool is growing. So coming back, we're a semiconductor company, Siemens pedigree. About 20 years ago, we spun off away from Siemens. Today we're the top 10 semiconductor companies worldwide. Malaysia is actually our largest back-end site. So this is assembly and test, semiconductor. And Malaysia, we have about 10,000 people in Malacca. So a very big site. And that's what we decided to do. That's what we decided to focus on. We signed an MOU with National Skill Development Corporation a couple of years ago, and then been working with the Electronic Sector Skills Council of India since then. And one of the things that came out from them was there's a lot of money from CSR going from companies like Siemens, the electronics majors, going into the country. But some of this is actually going into equipment, outfitting labs, outfitting facilities, and the utilization then becomes very low, right? Of course, in some cases, and I wanted to ask you a little bit Abhinav about the GE healthcare. In some cases, these companies actually use these facilities for training, to train the people that will eventually use these things in the field, right? And that increases the utilization. But the ask from the ESSCI was then, hey, let's try to think a little bit out of the box. Instead of throwing some money into and throwing some equipment into the space, why don't we try to do something different? So we cogitated and had several workshops in the end, we decided to bring a group of master trainers and industry people, some university professionals, some ITI principals, over to our site in Malaysia and give them a flavor of how we train our operators, how we train our technicians and engineers through the dual vocational system. So what happens in Malaysia, in Malacca, is that we actually work with the German-Malaysia Institute. So this, we divide the activities into fundamental training, so really background stuff, plant level training, so environmental safety and health, quality, lean, all this kind of stuff. And then there's the line level, the job level, and the machine level, right? So if you take these three, the institution like GMI, German-Malaysia Institute, can actually cover 1.5, kind of, right? And then the remaining hands-on stuff obviously has to be really happen in the companies. So this is the structure that we employ. Our operators go through this process and then they come back. So they do one series in GMI, they come to our place for training. After a certain cycle, they go back again, they come back. So they do a few cycles of this. So this mirrors the dual vocational structure. So we showed these guys, these delegates who came, this process as well. Yeah. So this is one, the master trainer training. And then the next step would be then to go into a center of excellence, to set up a place, where to identify the demand, the needs, whether it's a solar fab or LED or some other PCB plant, or semiconductor back-end plant, or module manufacturing plant, where this will be, and then placing this center of excellence in this kind of location, and then of course providing some equipment into that. Yeah. So why did we choose Malaysia? Obviously because it's our largest site. And it's our largest backend. So the backend for us, we felt that is most likely to really happen in India so far. There's so many discussions about front-end fab, wafer fab. We've explored many different cases, even with some partners. I believe the backend is probably the first wave that will come. So this is really the most relevant. We have also other backend facilities in Southeast Asia, in Asia. Singapore, for example. But Singapore is a little bit too automated. And then we also have in China and in Indonesia, but we felt that the workforces here were a little bit too homogeneous, right? So Malaysia kind of mirrors the scenario in India a little bit better, and also there's such a big group of people that they were able to do this very, very well. So this was a one-week program that we just completed 2 months ago, August 21st. I've given a few people this brochure. We've shared this with the Ministry of Skill Development and as well as our parent ministry in India, Ministry of Electronics and IT. So in India today, we don't have any manufacturing really. We're doing this as essentially as a preparatory activity, preparing the ground for when manufacturing really comes into play. Also obviously building good relations with the ministries. We have about 400 people in India, spread across Bangalore, Delhi, Pune, mostly in R&D. We do quite a lot of software R&D over there, application level, microcontroller drivers, and all that kind of stuff. Some sales and marketing. We do pretty well in India. We're amongst the top number 1 and number 2 semiconductor suppliers. But even then, it's a small drop in the ocean compared to some of the other big markets. But we believe this manufacturing will come, and when this manufacturing comes, it will create this pool for the skill development, and it's already happening, right? So that's one main point that I wanted to bring out, this demand pool. Another one was, I talked about the incentives that have been coming in from the ministry. Right? The incentives really were going to push manufacturing, so you can almost get like 40%, right? 25 to 40, even 45% incentives from the government to help you with capex in the new electronics plant. This has been happening over the last 3 years. But then the coordinating the support on the skill side together with these activities, I think this is not so well coordinated as yet. There are obviously the NSDC and the skills councils that there is a lot of support coming in, but maybe that coordination needs to happen a little bit better. The training is done in isolation without the demand pool is not very effective. And the last one is this system of that German-Malaysia Institute that we experienced. I think it's something that is pretty good because the German-Malaysia Institute in Kajang, close to KL, they actually consolidate the needs of the German cluster, right? So they consolidate not only us as a German headquartered company, but others like BMW, Bosch, Conti, Siemens. And this actually allows them to aggregate these requirements and provide this across the cluster. So maybe that's something that the states, at the state level in India can think about as AP develops the new capital city and all the manufacturing activities that are coming out around there. Maybe aggregating the needs and maybe deciding, determining certain institutions that will drive this. And then from there, then it spins out. Yeah. So just a few points. So last of all, really, thanks not only to the Electronic Sector Skills Council, Mr. Mahapatra, but also to our own ministry people as well, Minister Ravi Shankar, Ajay Kumar, the Additional Secretary, who have been guiding us into how we should run this. And also, of course, support from Nish Kumar from the SDC. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's nice to hear about some of the work that's happening at NSDC, and I'm sure that a lot of it will take that forward as well. We have a few minutes left for questions, so I'd like to throw the floor open to any questions.
Yeah,
my
question is to Dr. Zhang. In my visit to China, in particular Shenzhen and Dongguan, which you mentioned, and you've done some studies there. Shenzhen being the first city where China does the industrialization, and they did it in a super fast time and very successful. But as the wages went up, the cost of land went up, the cost of doing business also went up, and many of the manufacturing companies moved more inward to Dongguan. And Dongguan now is very thriving. And again, the same effect comes into play, cost is going up. And even Shenzhen and Dongguan, you actually attract people, not from Shenzhen and Dongguan, but outside of these cities to work in the manufacturing companies. And I see an effect of operators, technicians, engineers coming in to work in these companies. And in fact, I visited one company and asked the boss, what is the turnover rate over in your company? I was dumbfounded when he says, it is 100% per year. The turnover is that fast. And they managed to cope, in that kind of environment. I don't know how they do it, but with that kind of, scenario, how does the TVET training is been done to backfill some of these positions? Because I understand that after Chinese New Year, they'll go back and they'll never come back. Or if they come back, they go for a competitor company. It's a very challenging, environment, and with that kind of milieu, how do you, provide, stability in that kind of industry, particularly in the TVET training?
Let's take a few more questions then.
Okay, my name is Anish Mishra. My question is for actually Mr. Abhinav Madan. Okay, firstly, I was very glad to hear how your institute have actually set up its institutions in the next select affected areas. I think it's really it was really nice to hear that. Okay, my question is that you showed the example of the lady who was working in the CDC. So the things that by you actually helping to improve the skills, what you cause in India is actually a shift of population from rural to urban. This is where we see people from the interior part of the interior province shifting into the metropolis. So my question is that instead of getting everybody, giving them skills and shifting them to big cities, this will cause problems in big cities, like no traffic jam, overcrowding, electricity problems. I mean, you must be very well aware of those. So what I'd like to know from you is, instead of doing that, why not empower them in the agriculture sector? Agriculture sector can also be a profitable area. At the same time, you can also teach them how to do small businesses like like sewing, chicken farm rearing, why not make them job creators instead of job seekers? Thank you.
Yeah, no, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I mean, this is a superb session. I only wish we had it earlier in the day when the larger audience is really brilliant. Just a couple of very quick comments to Dr. Zhang. I was seeing almost a mirror image as, there's something, a mirror image of what you're saying. There seem to be silver linings on Guangdong's industrially very advanced province. But the decentralization of all these initiatives have allowed ventures to come up which would be correct to say, may not have come up otherwise. The gap, as you pointed out, is the lack of a certification network which would allow for portability, am I right? And that's also what you associate with the governance issue. I'm not sure if I'm phrasing it appropriately.
You mean the local skill credentialing system?
Yeah. You mentioned governance was a major issue right through. I just do the round of questions. Mr. Madan, I just want to echo what this is. Tarang obviously is doing amazing work, and we all read about it. It started off with the most disenfranchised districts. And the very fact that you're able to place in the most industrially advanced areas in Chennai and other places is testimony to do that. They bring a number of questions, but just listen of how do you prepare for this huge, I know the cultural chasm that exists. How do you bridge all of that? I know it's a very topic constant for a very lengthy conversation. Two more very quick points, if I may. Just to more. One was about the eventual placement of the apprentice, because I think a large part of the tab is being picked up by the government as well, right? So I was just curious about that. How many of the students who get internships are placed? And just concluding on, thank you very much, and I apologize for the time constraint. That's very kind of you. What exemplified is actually what the government is looking for. It's the way the first time we read the skills development mission, it was create skills and investment will be forthcoming. It's almost like it, and that's not the case. But this is the case where we're seeing in tangible terms a company that's gone ahead and is preparing ground for future entry, in a sense. That provides a very well-rounded perspective to the narrative that we're trying to have today.
Right, and there's one last question, we can take that. Okay, Priscilla.
Abhinav, my questions for you. Are you going back to the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 model? Is there a conscious effort on the part of Gram Tarang, as well as what is the thinking of other training providers out there? Because a lot of them are dependent on government funding. And even our credible agencies as well, 70% of their operations are government funded. So is there a conscious effort or is there complacency?
Thank you. So we start with Mr. Madan.
All right. I think I'll take the migration one first, and it's a soul-searching question actually, because many people in my team feel very strongly about it. One of our senior directors in our organization says, "What is it that you're doing? This is rubbish. You're taking people from lovely rural areas where there's like greenery, fresh air to breathe, no pollution, and putting them into a Bangalore where there's already traffic jams." But I think, from my perspective, how I justify it at the moment is the household income. It's, for me, when I quit my job and I got into this sector, one of the reasons was I felt that this is where I could make the most direct impact in the shortest period of time possible, right? And that girl who went from, in fact, she was in a tribal district called in Sambalpur, who went to Bangalore in the crowded city. She went from earning 60 rupees a day for 3 months of the year to earning about 8,000 rupees a month, right? And she actually is able to now fund the education of her siblings, save up enough money. Typically, she'll work for 3 or 4 years before she gets married. Right? That's the other issue that we have. So there's a number of social challenges. They come back. It's not that 90% of them will come back home. In China, it's the New Year. For us, it's what just happened, the Durga Puja in East India. It's the Dussehra time of the year where people want to come back and then they may not go again, or they get married, they settle down. So there's a constant movement between the rural and urban, right? And I think some of it is good, right? Because the cities aren't planned as well as Singapore has planned itself, doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, right? The urban planning in India is abysmal. It's shocking. I mean, one of the reasons I'm happily settled in Bhubaneshwar for 8 years is because it takes me 15 minutes to the airport. Whereas in Delhi or in Bangalore, it takes a couple of hours. So, yes, we are overcrowding the cities, but where is the livelihood? Where is the income-making opportunity? Where is the exposure, right? When we have a School of Agriculture Sciences in our tribal campus in South Odisha. And there we are doing some programs in the agri sector, but it's very complex. The agriculture sector is really, really hard. Creating entrepreneurs is really hard. Somebody asked the secretary the question as well, and he said, it's the agri department, the ministry has to look into it. It's something that we're not able to do. We have a School of Agriculture Sciences, it does BSc programs, it does Diploma in Agriculture Sciences. So maybe the daughters and the sons of farmers can bring in some of the technologies and bring in, some of the, for example, automation of some of the harvesters, right? Bring in that stuff, bring in their understanding of soil and crops. So that is helping a little bit, but actually in terms of creating employment like poultry farmers and fisheries and so on, we've not been able to organize ourselves to do that very successfully, and we would like to do more of it. But still, that would only be maybe 10% of what we do, because India has the problems of scale, and the 15 million I was talking about, you need to give jobs to at least 60-70% of them. 30% of them, 20-30% of them could become nano, mini, micro entrepreneurs. So, but what I also see is, the silver lining is when they go to the city and they spend 2 years there, is that the exposure that they have and they bring that experience back with them to the village, right? The ideas that they come back with is much more than what they would have had just sitting in that school there. So so we hope that in the long run, this huge migration will not happen. It will come down. The second question was around preparing for the cultural chasm. I think that's key. So the life skills program that GAP has supported us with has been really useful. In fact, the last little video clip was of our trainer in Bangalore, and she's in the hostel of where the girls are staying. And one of the things that we show to them is how do you, if for example, if you fall sick, you're entitled to, there's an employee insurance scheme, the SIC, which the government mandates. So you're entitled to even, we've had really severe cases of dengue, of malaria. We've had 4 or 5 deaths over the last few years of our students, right? So when you're training in thousands, when something can go wrong, it will. And how do you manage that? So that's a very important part. Not only the cultural shift, but also going to a hospital, taking care of your own health, taking care of your own food, time, for example, time management. It's not taught anywhere in school, whereas here, if you don't log in at 9 o'clock in the morning, you lose wage for the day. So there's a lot of other things which go into it, and that's a very important part of the program. The last one was on the one-third model. Yes, we are making a conscious shift, and other training providers will have to. In fact, from the long term, we see that it's only the institutional models which will work, right? There has to be an institutional model which works on the ability to charge a fee, for a longer term course with some element of subsidy in it. It cannot be the way it is currently. And one of the ways we are trying to increase the industry contribution, though the industry is not willing to pay for the training fee of the student, what we are able to do is charge them a recruitment fee. Right? So we say, right, at least pay us some portion of it, bring down, subsidize the cost somehow. So we are trying out various models, and then the staffing is another part of it which we are looking at. And there's an income. For example, right now we train 20 to 25,000 youths a year who get jobs, and they go on to the roles of other staffing companies like team leads, right? So we realize that we probably should get into that business so we can at least make some margin there, so that we reduce our dependence on government. So we have to innovate on that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Chen.
Thank you for the questions. So the first one, in response to Mr. Paul about the labor turnover, I would say retaining migrant workers is a systematic project. So there are a lot of reasons underlying the high turnover in all these factories. It's not only about training. The biggest problem that prevents workers from really become residents of the city is the hukou system, this household registration system in China, which keeps workers attached to their places of origin, and it's very difficult for them to get hukou from big cities like Dongguan and Shenzhen. And there are a lot of things that are associated with this system, including social welfare, also training opportunities, and also children's education opportunities. This is very important for a lot of them in considering staying or leaving, right? So what they did, the local government did in Dongguan is, first of all, they are nowadays trying to get rid of those so-called sunset industries. So they encourage those industries, textile and garment, electronic processing, all those industries, to relocate to inland areas where all those migrant workers originally come from, right? So nowadays the factories are close to their hometowns, so they can somehow work at home. And another policy that the Guangdong government doing, which is relevant to your question, is they have this latest education reform that allows non-Guangdong students to enroll in polytechnics in Guangdong, because they used to disallow that, because it has to be people with local hukou that can enroll in those schools, right? So now they allow them to enroll in local polytechnics, but not allowing them to enroll in local academic colleges. So they receive a lot of critiques because they think it's a new round of social stratification, right? Because you just push all these migrant workers' children to become migrant workers again. You don't allow them to become white-collar workers because you only allow them to go to polytechnics, vocational schools, as opposed to academic colleges. But this is one of the issues that may answer your question in terms of training's role in returning migrant workers. In response to Dr. Singh's question about the governance, yes, it's true that Guangdong has been the most economically advanced province in China during the reform decades. But I would say that the economic growth didn't really rely on the very strong governance of the local government. Actually, they were seeking, I think the best thing that the Guangdong government was able to do is that they were able to achieve a balance between strong governance and giving autonomy to the grassroots to experiment, right? To have all these innovative experiment reforms. That's why we see all these kind of innovative experimentation taking place in Guangdong nowadays. But that's why there's this problem. All their reform attempts need to be formally recognized eventually by the state in order to gain a wider scope of influence. So it really relies eventually still on the state's willingness to recognize all of these. I don't know if this has answered your question.
And Mr. Ma, too.
Yeah, for internship placement, so far has been quite good, except for sector like electronics. So it seems like there's not enough places. So what we do is we need to flip-flop the students, not enough places out there. So, but it's also a good indicator. We'll monitor the trend. Maybe our intake is too big, right? But moving ahead, there could be challenges because IT, the polytechnics, there are 5 polytechnics out there, everybody going out for internship, So we will monitor, but then we're only asking the company to pay about $450 a month, but the poly rate is about $600. So there's some differentiation out there as well.
And Mr. Tu? Great. Thank you so much.